The dim glow of the restaurant's chandelier cast soft golden light over the elegant dining room. Plates clinked, quiet murmurs of conversation filled the air, and the occasional burst of laughter floated from the wealthiest patrons enjoying their lavish meals. It was the kind of place where fortunes were spent without a second thought, where business moguls, celebrities, and high society elites gathered to flaunt their status. And in the midst of it all, Evelyn moved between the tables, balancing a heavy tray in one hand and forcing a polite smile. She was used to being invisible here. To them, she was just another waitress, someone who brought their food and refilled their glasses, nothing more. But what none of them knew was that beneath the simple black uniform and the tired eyes, there was something extraordinary waiting to be seen. At a corner table, near the grand piano that no one ever played, sat Alexander Sterling, the billionaire. He was a man of influence, his presence commanding without effort. He wasn't loud or boastful like the others who flaunted their wealth. He was different, observant, calculating. And tonight, he was bored. His sharp eyes followed Evelyn as she gracefully moved through the room. Something about her intrigued him, though he couldn't quite place what it was. Maybe it was the way she carried herself, poised yet unassuming. Or maybe it was just the way her eyes lingered on the piano every time she passed by it. Then, on impulse, he called out. "You there," he said, his voice smooth but firm. Evelyn stopped mid-step, her grip tightening on the tray. She turned slowly, unsure if he was speaking to her or someone behind her. "Me, sir?" she asked cautiously. "Yes, you." Alexander leaned forward slightly, a smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "You keep looking at the piano. Do you play?" Her heart stuttered in her chest. She hadn't touched a piano in years, not since, well, it didn't matter. Not anymore. She swallowed hard and shook her head. I used to." He arched an eyebrow, clearly not convinced. "Used to? That sounds like an excuse." Evelyn shifted, uncomfortably, feeling the weight of the entire dining room pressing down on her. People were starting to notice. Heads turned. Whispers spread like wildfire. "I just work here," she said carefully. "I'm not a musician." "But what if you were?" Alexander challenged, his gaze locking onto hers. "What if, just for tonight, you sat down and played?" She hesitated. Every nerve in her body screamed to say no, to walk away, to keep blending into the background. But something about his tone, his certainty, made it impossible to refuse. The entire restaurant had gone silent now, all eyes on her. And as she slowly placed her tray down and took a tentative step toward the piano, she felt the electricity in the air, like something incredible was about to happen. And then she sat down. Her fingers hovered over the keys, trembling slightly. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes, and let go. The first note rang out, and within seconds, the room was no longer filled with murmurs of wealth and status. No. It was filled with something far greater, pure, unfiltered magic. The first note hung in the air like a secret finally spoken. It was delicate, yet powerful, hesitant at first, then growing bolder as Evelyn's fingers danced across the keys. The restaurant had never been this quiet before. Conversations had stopped. Waiters stood frozen mid-step. Even the clinking of silverware had ceased. All eyes were on her. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel small. She didn't feel invisible. The melody flowed from her like it had been waiting for this moment. She wasn't just playing the piano, she was telling a story of loss, of dreams abandoned, of hope that refused to die. And Alexander Sterling, the man who had forced her into this moment, sat in stunned silence, watching her with an intensity that made her fingers tremble. He hadn't expected this. None of them had. Evelyn had spent years running from music, believing it was a part of her past that she could never reclaim. Once upon a time, she had been a prodigy, playing, in grand concert halls, her talent celebrated by those who mattered. But life had a cruel way of pulling people from their dreams. A tragedy had taken everything from her. Her family, her home, her belief that she was meant for more. She had buried that part of herself, convinced it was gone forever. And yet, here she was. The song built in intensity, raw emotion pouring into every note. Alexander's hand tightened around his glass, his usual composed expression slipping. He had spent years around talent, musicians, artists, visionaries, but this was different. This wasn't just skill. It was soul. Somewhere near the bar, a woman wiped away a tear. A man who had barely looked up from his phone all night sat in awe. The restaurant had transformed, no longer just a place for the wealthy to dine. It had become an audience to something extraordinary. When the final note lingered and faded into silence, Evelyn exhaled shakily. She dared to look up, her heart pounding in her chest. And then applause. Not the polite, reserved kind given out of obligation, but the kind that shook the walls. People rose to their feet, clapping, cheering, some even whistling. Evelyn's face burned as she quickly stood, stepping away from the piano as if she had done something wrong. But Alexander wasn't clapping. He was still sitting there, staring at her like she was an unsolved mystery. And then slowly, he stood. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice quieter than before, but filled with something new. Evelyn hesitated. She didn't know how to answer that. She had spent so long being just a waitress, just someone trying to get by, that she had forgotten who she used to be. Before she could say anything, the restaurant manager appeared, a look of shock and excitement on his face. "Evelyn, I had no idea you could do that," he exclaimed. You're incredible!" She swallowed hard, feeling the weight of too many eyes on her. "I should get back to work," she murmured, attempting to step past Alexander, but he gently blocked her path. "Not yet," he said. "I think we need to talk." Her stomach twisted. She didn't know what he wanted from her, but something told her this moment wasn't just going to fade away. This was the kind of night that changed everything, and she wasn't sure if she was ready for that. Evelyn's pulse quickened as she stood in front of Alexander, the weight of his gaze heavy on her. She had spent years avoiding attention, blending into the background, keeping her past buried. And now, in a matter of minutes, all of that had changed. "I don't think we do," she said quietly, trying to move past him again. Alexander didn't step aside immediately. He wasn't used to being ignored, and certainly not refused. But something in Evelyn's expression, something raw, something afraid, made him soften. He wasn't looking at just another waitress. He was looking at someone who had lived through something, someone who had lost something. And for reasons he couldn't yet explain, he needed to know more. "I won't keep you," he said finally, his voice gentler. "But that wasn't just music back there. That was something else. And I think you know it." Evelyn swallowed, her fingers still tingling from the keys. She didn't want to admit how much she had felt in that moment, how something deep inside her had cracked open. She had locked music away because it reminded her of everything she had lost, but tonight had proven that no matter how much she tried to run from it, music was still a part of her. "I don't play anymore," she murmured. Alexander's lips pressed into a thin line. "That's a shame," he said, "because you were born to." His words unsettled her in a way she couldn't explain. It wasn't flattery, it was certainty, and somehow that made it even harder to walk away. The restaurant was still buzzing from her performance, customers stealing glances at her, whispering to one another. The manager had already hinted at the idea of her playing regularly, but Evelyn wasn't sure she could handle that. She wasn't sure she wanted to. As she finally turned away, Alexander called out once more. "Wait." She paused, but didn't. "Turn back. There's a gala next weekend," he said. "A charity event. I'd like you to play." Evelyn let out a short, breathy laugh. "You don't even know me." "I don't have to," Alexander replied. "I heard you, and that was enough." The offer hung in the air between them. A week ago, she would have laughed at the idea. A day ago, she would have dismissed it without a second thought. But tonight had changed something. Tonight had reminded her of a dream she once had, a dream she had given up on. She could say no. She could continue waiting tables, pretending music had never been a part of her life, or she could take a chance. And for the first time in a long time, she wanted to take a chance. Evelyn turned back, meeting his eyes. "One night," she said, firmly. "That's all." Alexander's smirk returned, but there was something else beneath it, satisfaction. "One night," he agreed, but deep down, they both knew it wouldn't end there. The night of the gala arrived faster than Evelyn had expected. She spent hours convincing herself she wasn't ready, that she didn't belong in the glittering world of high society. But as she stepped onto the stage, dressed in a simple but elegant gown Alexander had arranged, everything else faded away. The grand piano stood before her, waiting. The murmuring crowd, the flashing cameras, the weight of expectation, it all dissolved the moment her fingers touched the keys, and then she played. This time there was no hesitation, no fear. This time, she let go completely. And as the music swelled, filling the vast hall with something pure and breathtaking, she realized the truth. She had never lost music. She had only been afraid to find it again. As the final note echoed through the room, silence fell, thick, charged, expectant. And then, just like before, the applause erupted. But this time, Evelyn wasn't trying to run from it. She stood, heart racing, breath unsteady as Alexander approached. "Told you," he said with a small, knowing smile. Evelyn exhaled a quiet laugh, shaking her head. "Yeah," she admitted. "You did." And just like that, her life changed. Not because of a Millionaire's challenge, not because of a single performance, but because for the first time in years she had finally let herself believe again.